Have you ever wondered about the origins of what's often referred to as the world's oldest profession? Yes, we're talking about prostitution. This profession, as controversial as it may be, has been a part of human societies for millennia. It has been viewed, regulated, and stigmatized in myriad ways, reflecting the complexities of societal norms and values. This journey through time reveals the ever-changing dynamics of human behavior and morality. So where does the story of prostitution begin? Let's rewind to the ancient times, believe it or not, evidence of prostitution can be traced back to the ancient civilizations. In ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, we find the earliest known records of prostitution. Here, it wasn't merely a commercial transaction, but rather deeply entwined with religious practices. Sacred prostitution, as it was referred to, was believed to appease the gods and bring fertility to the land. In these temple brothels, priestesses, known as sacred harlots, would offer their bodies in exchange for donations to the temple. From Mesopotamia, let's travel to ancient Greece, a civilization known for its philosophers, warriors, and yes, its brothels. Here, prostitution was considered less of a religious act and more of a necessary social institution. In fact, it was so ingrained in society that Solon, a famous Athenian lawmaker, is said to have introduced state-run brothels to control and regulate the trade. Courtesans, or hetairai, held a unique position in society. They were educated, independent, and played significant roles in social and cultural events, often rubbing shoulders with the elite. Finally, let's journey to ancient Rome, where prostitution was as public as it was legal. It was a bustling business in the Roman Empire, with brothels scattered across the city. There was even a specific class of prostitutes called meretrices, who were registered with the state, paid taxes, and had their own guild. While they were often stigmatized, these women were also protected under Roman law. However, it wasn't all glamour and glory. The life of a prostitute in these ancient societies was often fraught with hardship and danger. They were subject to exploitation, abuse, and had little to no rights. The dichotomy between the societal acceptance of prostitution and the harsh realities faced by the workers themselves is a theme that has persisted throughout history. So from necessity to religion, prostitution had its place in ancient societies, but what about the Middle Ages? As we move into the Middle Ages, the perception of prostitution begins to shift. During this period, the church held great sway over societal norms. However, instead of outright condemning prostitution, the church adopted a complex stance. On the one hand, it viewed prostitution as a necessary evil, a lesser vice that curbed the potential for greater sins such as adultery and sodomy. On the other hand, it still considered the act of selling one's body for sexual services as sinful. This paradoxical view led to some intriguing developments. To regulate and control this necessary evil, municipal governments, often under the guidance of the church, started establishing brothels known as stew houses. These were places where prostitution was confined and regulated. The women working in these brothels were often registered, monitored, and subjected to regular health checks. These stew houses were not just tolerated, but in many cases they were owned and operated by the local governments. The earnings from these establishments were often used to fund public projects such as bridges and roads. It became a system where the profits of sin were used for the betterment of society. But let's not forget the Crusades, a series of religious wars that also influenced the role of prostitution. During these times, the church sanctioned military brothels to accompany soldiers on their campaigns. The rationale was that these establishments would prevent the soldiers from committing greater sins, such as rape or sodomy. However, it's important to note that while the church and society at large might have seen prostitution as a necessary evil, the women involved often had little choice in the matter. Poverty, lack of education, and societal constraints often forced them into this line of work. Their lives were not romantic, but fraught with danger, disease, and social stigma. With the Middle Ages came a shift in societal views on prostitution. As we move into the modern era, these views continue to evolve. As we enter the modern era, prostitution takes on a new face. The Victorian era marks a significant shift in society's view of this age-old profession. As the world industrialized, cities expanded, and with them, the sex industry. The Victorian era saw the rise of red light districts, areas unofficially sanctioned for prostitution. These districts, named after the red lanterns that signaled their purpose, became commonplace in many cities worldwide. Yet as the visibility of the sex industry grew, so did societal discomfort. The Victorian era was marked by a moralistic and prudish outlook, and prostitution was seen as a social ill that needed to be contained. This led to the introduction of various regulations and laws aimed at controlling and suppressing the profession. In Britain, for instance, the Contagious Diseases Acts were introduced in the mid-19th century, subjecting prostitutes to mandatory health checks to control the spread of venereal diseases. Fast forward to the 20th century, the conversation around sex work began to shift. The focus moved from suppression to understanding, and in some cases, acceptance. The sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s brought about a fresh perspective on sex work. It was during this time that the term sex work was coined, recognizing it as a form of labor rather than a moral failing. As society progressed, so did the arguments around sex work. The late 20th century saw the emergence of the sex workers' rights movement, advocating for the decriminalization and legalization of the profession. They argued that sex work, like any other profession, should be regulated to ensure the safety and rights of those involved. In the modern era, the conversation around prostitution is multifaceted, with views ranging from criminalization to legalization. As we delve deeper into the 21st century, these conversations continue to evolve, reflecting the changing attitudes and values of society. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the conversation around prostitution is more complex than ever. As we step into this era, we find a world that is both technologically advanced and socially diverse. And these facets have significantly influenced the state of prostitution globally. On one hand, there are countries like the Netherlands and Germany, where prostitution is legal and regulated. Here, sex work is treated like any other profession, complete with labor rights and health regulations. These countries argue that such an approach reduces violence against sex workers and allows for better health monitoring. On the other hand, there are places like the United States where, with the exception of certain areas in Nevada, prostitution remains criminalized. Here, the perspective is that decriminalization would lead to an increase in human trafficking and exploitation. Yet, regardless of the legal stance, one cannot ignore the impact of technology on this age-old profession. So, we've journeyed through thousands of years of history, tracing the evolution of prostitution from the ancient times to the present day. We've seen how this trade, often referred to as the world's oldest profession, has its roots firmly planted in the most ancient of civilizations. We've explored its existence in the ancient world, where it was often tied to religious practices, accepted, and at times even revered. We've witnessed its transformation during the Middle Ages, a period marked by a stark contrast between public condemnation and private acceptance. We then journeyed into the modern era, where we observed the profession's struggle with legality and morality, its ties to the underworld, and the fight for rights and recognition. We've also looked at how it has adapted and evolved in the 21st century, with technology playing a pivotal role in shaping its current state. Throughout this journey, we've seen how prostitution's role and perception have varied vastly across different societies and epochs. From being seen as a necessary evil to a profession to be respected, the wide spectrum of attitudes toward prostitution reflects our own evolving views on sex, morality, and commerce. History has shown us that prostitution, often dubbed the world's oldest profession, is deeply intertwined with our societies. Reflecting our attitudes towards sex, morality, and commerce, the debate continues, but one thing is clear: it's a story as old as civilization itself.